Aeneid, Book 5. By now Aeneas was out at sea with his fleet, holding course through waves darkening under a cold north wind, and looking back at the walls of Carthage lit with the flames of Dido's pyre. The cause of the fire was hidden, but the terrible pain of a great love defiled, and knowledge of what a frenzied woman could do, gave the Trojans grim presentiments. When the ships were out on the deep water, with no land in sight, but only sea and sky, a cobalt cloud loomed overhead, bringing night and storm, and the waves shuddered with shadows. Palinurus, the pilot, cried from the high stern, "Look at these storm clouds ringing the sky. What are you doing, Father Neptune?" With this he gave the order to bring in the rigging and man the oars. Then he trimmed the sails aslant to the wind and spoke again. "Noble Aeneas, not even if Jupiter promised me himself could I hope to reach Italy with such a sky. The winds have shifted and are blowing across us, roaring in from the black west. The air is thickening, and for all our efforts we cannot make headway into this storm. We must follow fortune and let her call our course. The friendly shores of your brother Eryx and Sicilian ports are not too far, if I remember my stars." And Aeneas, steadfast. "For some time now I have seen what the wind wants. You can't steer against it. Set the sail for a new course. What place could be more welcome to me and my weary ships than the island of Trojan Acestes, the land that holds my father's bones in her bosom?" This said, they headed for port, with the west wind filling their sails. The fleet raced on and turned at last toward the familiar shore. Standing on a distant hilltop, Acestes marveled at the arrival of friendly ships. He hurried down toward them, bristling with javelins and a Libyan bearskin. Acestes, born of a Trojan mother to the river god Crinisus, mentioning their family ties, he congratulated them on their return and made them welcome with his rustic riches and comforts of home. Early the next day, when a clear dawn had put the stars to flight, Aeneas assembled his men on the shore and spoke to them from a high dune. "Great sons of Dardanus, my people born of the gods' high race, a year of circling moons has passed since we laid in earth the last remains of my divine father, and hallowed his altars. And now, by my count, the day has come that I shall always keep as a day of mourning, as you willed, O gods, and a day of honor. Were I spending this day as an exile in the Gaetulian Syrtes, or the Sea of Argos, or in Mycenae itself, still I would fulfill my yearly vow with solemn rites, and pile the altars high with offerings. But now we stand near my father's bones, not without, I think, the will of heaven, carried here to a safe and friendly haven. Then let us all celebrate this day with joy, pray for favorable winds, and ask Anchises for his blessing. May I offer these rites year by year when I found my city, in temples consecrated to his memory. Acestes, himself of Trojan birth, has given 2 head of oxen for every ship. Summon to the feast the gods of your hearth and the gods of Acestes. Moreover, when the 9th day dawns with light for men and reveals the world, I will propose games and contests for the Trojans. First a regatta for our sailing ships, and then a foot race, a javelin throw, and a boxing match with rawhide gloves. Come one and all, and compete for glory. Now wreathe your brows, and observe silence all." Aeneas spoke and crowned his own brows with his mother's myrtle. Helmas did the same, as did aged Acestes, and the boy Ascanius. The others followed. Aeneas returned to the mound, thousands thronging round him. He poured a libation, 2 goblets of undiluted wine, 2 of fresh milk, and 2 of the victim's blood, and scattered flowers. Then he cried, "Hail once more, venerable father, hail, ashes rescued in vain, soul and shade of my sire. I was not destined to seek the fields of Italy with you at my side, nor find with you the Ausonian Tiber." He had no sooner spoken when there slithered from the shrine's base a serpent trailing 7 huge coils. It circled the mound and glided tranquilly among the altars, its back spotted midnight blue, and its scales shimmering with the iridescent gold of a rainbow, refracting the gold-scutched sun. Aeneas was filled with awe. The serpent slid its length amid the bowls and polished cups, tasted the food on the altars, and at last crept harmlessly beneath the mound. Aeneas renewed the rites with greater fervor, unsure whether it was the genius of the place or his father's spirit. He sacrificed 2 sheep, 2 swine, and as many dark-backed bullocks, all the while pouring wine from shallow bowls and calling great Anchises, soul and shades of Acheron. His men gladly brought gifts and heaped them on the altars. Others slaughtered steers, set out cauldrons, and spread out on the grass, roasted the meat over glowing coals. Dawn of the 9th long-awaited day was escorted in by the horses of the sun. The games, Anchises' illustrious name, brought in the crowds. They filled the shores in a holiday mood, some coming to see Aeneas and his men, others to compete. The prizes were set out for all to see. Ritual tripods, green wreaths and palms for the victors, arms, robes dyed rich purple, a talent of silver and another of gold. A trumpet pealed from a central mound, signaling the start of the competition. 4 ships entered the first contest, well matched in oarage, the pride of the fleet. The swift Leviathan was captained by Mnestheus, namesake of the Italian clan of Memmius. Gaius commanded the huge Chimera, a trireme the size of a city, rowed by Dardanian youths, sweeping their oars in 3 ordered tiers and propelling her on. Sergestus, namesake of the house of Sergius, rowed in the great Centaur, and Scylla, a sea-blue vessel, carried Cloanthus, whence your family, Roman Cluentius. Far offshore lies a rock, pounded by the waves. During winter storms it is submerged, but in fair weather it rises in stony silence from the still sea, and cormorants sun themselves on its surface. Father Aeneas wedged a leafy oak branch there, to mark the turning point for the sailors. They drew for positions. The captains high on the sterns gleamed in purple and gold, and the rowers were wreathed in poplar, their bare shoulders glistening with oil. They sat on the benches, hands tense on the oars, and eagerly awaited the start, blood shaking their hearts in their lust for glory. The instant the trumpet sounded, they broke from their places. The shouts of the rowers split the air, and the water churned and foamed with each pull of their arms. Side by side the ships plowed furrows, and the sea's plain was ripped to its depths by the cleaving oars and the triple prongs of the vessel's beaks. Chariot teams that break from the start and eat up the plain are not so headlong, even when their drivers shake out the reins and lean forward to apply the whip. The crowds applaud and cheer on their favorite, and all the woodlands return the sound, and it echoes off the hills and cliffs and reverberates across the sheltered shore. Gaius took the lead first, slipping through the waves amid all the roaring. Cloanthus was next, with better rowers but a heavier ship. Then, equally far behind, Leviathan and Centaur battled for third. Leviathan would pull ahead, then huge Centaur would pass her by, and then they would sail neck and cleave the salt water with their curving keels. They were drawing close to the rocky turn when Gaius, the leader on the chorus, called out to his ship's pilot, Menoetes. "Why are you going so far to the right? Steer this way, hug the shore, let the oars scrape the rock on the left. The others can have the deep water." But Menoetes, fearing blind rocks, swung the prow out to sea. "Where are you veering? Hug the rocks, Menoetes!" As Gaius was shouting, he looked back and saw Cloanthus coming up fast, cutting a course between Gaius's ship and the roaring rock. He surged past in an instant, turned the goal, and was safely out on the open sea. Gaius's dismay burned in his bones, and tears streamed down his face. Forgetting his honor and his sailor's safety, he pushed the sluggish Menoetes off the stern into the sea headfirst and took the rudder himself. Urging on his crew, the captain, now pilot, turned the prow toward shore. Menoetes, heavy and old, bobbed up from the depths and pulled himself out, dripping wet onto the rock, and sat there. The Trojans laughed when he fell, laughed as he swam, and were laughing now as he vomited up buckets of sea water. Sergestus and Mnestheus, bringing up the rear, now brightened with hope of catching Gaius. Sergestus was ahead, coming up to the turn, but not by much. Leviathan's prow overlapped his keel and was pushing hard. Mnestheus strode up and down midship, exhorting his crew. "Lean on those oars, men, comrades of Hector, men I hand-picked for Troy's last stand. Show me the strength, the spirit you had in the shoals off Carthage and the Ionian Sea and Cape Malea's currents. We can't win this race. We're not shooting for first, if only, but Neptune decides the winners. But coming in last is a total disgrace. Your victory is to not let that happen." and they fell on the oars with a supreme effort. The bronze-beaked ships shivered under their strokes, and the sea slipped away beneath them as they panted for breath, mouths dry, sweat pouring down their bodies in rivers. It was an accident that gave them the glory, as Sergestus rashly squeezed his prow inside and into the danger zone. He ran out of luck and caught the jutting rock. The oars splintered on its jagged edge, and the prow crashed hard and hung out over the water. The sailors rose with a shout and steadied her by rowing backward. Then they pushed her off with iron-tipped poles and fished out their oars. Menesthius, flushed with success, broke free with oars flashing and winds at his call, running shoreward on the open sea. A dove, flushed from its nest in a cave's porous rock, flies out with a tremendous explosion of wings into the open fields, and then starts gliding in pure, still flight on the quiet air. Thus Menesthius, and thus the Leviathan, cutting through the final stretch of water and flying along on her own momentum. First she left behind Sergestus, struggling on the craggy rock, and vainly calling for help on the shoals, while he learned how to row with broken oars. Then she caught Gaius on the huge Chimera, which, without her pilot, soon fell behind. At the finish, only Cloanthus was left, and Menesthius went after him with all he had. The noise from the crowd doubled, all rooting for the ship behind. The sky rang with their cheers. The leading crew cringed to lose the glory now in their grasp, and would trade their lives for it. The other feeds off success. They can because they think they can, and perhaps they would have won when they drew up level, if Cloanthus had not stretched out both hands over the sea and made this prayerful vow. Gods of the sea, upon whose plains I race, I will place before your altars on this shore a shining bowl to discharge this my vow. Cast entrails in the waves and pour forth wine. He spoke, and the gods deep in the water heard his prayer, all the Nereids, Phorcus and his daughter Panopea, and as the ship moved on, Father Fortunus himself reached out his great hand and drove her forward, swifter than wind or a speeding arrow. She flew to the land and came to rest deep in the harbor. Then Aeneas, true son of Anchises, summoned all the crews in ritual fashion, and proclaiming Cloanthus the victor, wreathed his brows with fresh green laurel. Then he had each ship select 3 bullocks, and gave to each wine and a great bar of silver. The 2 leading captains he singled out with special honors. To the victor he gave a gold-embroidered cloak with a wavy border of Meliboean purple, and the woven design of a royal youth on wooded Mount Ida, a boy keen in the hunt, chasing down stags with his javelin. As he ran, out of breath, an eagle of Jove swooped down from Ida to catch him up in his hooking talons. The boy's aged guardians lifted their palms in vain to the stars, and his dogs barked at the wind. To Menesthius, who won 2nd place, Aeneas gave a corselet with burnished links interwoven with triple-meshed gold that he himself had stripped from Demoleos by the rushing Simois under Ilium's walls, a prize of honor and a protection in war. Sagaras and Phaegius could barely carry the multi-layered corselet on their shoulders to give to Menesthius, yet Demoleos ran in it when he routed the Trojans. 3rd prize was a pair of bronze cauldrons and finely finished cups chased in silver. They all had their gifts and were gleaming with pride, their temples bound with crimson ribbons, when Sergestus, having, with consummate skill, wrenched his boat from the pernicious rock, was bringing her in, missing an entire tier of oars, a crippled vessel without any honor. Sometimes a snake, caught crossing a road, is run over by a bronze wheel, or struck by a rock thrown by a passerby who has left it half dead. It twists and writhes in an attempt to flee, and although its eyes burn with ferocity, and its tongue hisses in its upreared head, the rest of its wounded body is coiled as it struggles along in trailing knots. So too this ship and her oars, moving slowly, yet she made sail and pulled into the harbor. Aeneas gave Sergestus the promised gifts, glad to see the ship saved and her men returned, and added a slave woman, a Cretan named Pholoe, skilled in crafts and with 2 infants nursing. This contest done, pious Aeneas strode to a grassy field ringed by hills that formed a natural stadium, and thousands came with him. Here the hero took his place on a raised platform and invited all comers who had enough spirit to compete in a sprint for the prizes set forth. A crowd of Teucrians and Sicanians stepped up to enter. First and foremost, Nisus and Euryalus. Euryalus stood out for his youthful beauty, and Nisus for his pure love for this boy. Diores, a son of Priam, was next in line, and then Celeus and Patron, one of them from Acarnania and the other an Arcadian, the two Sicilians, Helymus and Panopes, woodsmen both and attendants of Acestes, and many more whose names oblivion hides. Standing in their midst, Aeneas addressed them. Hear my words, men, and be of good cheer. No one will leave here without winning a prize. 2 Cretan arrows with burnished steel tips and a 2-headed axe embossed with silver, the same award for all. The first 3 finishers will receive other prizes and will be wreathed in gold and olive. The winner will get a horse with splendid trappings. The prize for a second is an Amazonian quiver full of Thracian arrows slung on a belt with a broad gold band and a gemstone buckle. Third place will be content to leave the field with an Argive helmet. When he finished speaking, they took their places, and when the signal was given, they were off, streaming out from the line like pouring rain. When the finish was in sight, Nisus took off, leaving them all behind, faster than wind, or the wings of lightning. Next, but far behind, was Salius, and trailing behind him, Euryalus ran third. Helymus was in fourth, and hard on his heels was Diores, leaning over his shoulder. In a longer race, Diores would have passed him, or they would have finished dead even. They were, in the final stretch, tiring as they came up to the line, when Nisus had the bad luck to slip on a patch of grass, wet with the blood of slaughtered oxen. He was already celebrating his victory when he lost his footing and fell face first into the filthy gore from the sacrifice. But he did not forget Euryalus or his love for the boy. He slid through the slime into the path of Salius and knocked him head over heels onto the hard-packed sand. Euryalus shot ahead and, thanks to his friend, flew on to victory to the sound of applause. Helymus finished second and Diores third, but Salius protested loud and long before the spectators, filling the ears of the elders in front with his complaints that he had been cheated and robbed of his prize. Euryalus was saved by his popularity and becoming tears, and by the manly spirit, all the more pleasing in so handsome a frame. And Diores gave him strong vocal support. He had finished third, but would have no prize if Salius were awarded first place. Then Father Aeneas, your prizes are fixed, and no one will change the finishing order. But I do have a consolation prize for our friend who did not deserve to fall. And he presented the hide of a Gaetulian lion to Salius, a huge, shaggy skin with golden claws. At this Nisus put in, if the losers are to get these great prizes, and if you feel sorry for falls, what about me, Nisus? I would have won if I had not had the same bad luck as Salius. As he spoke, he displayed his face and arms filthy with muck. Aeneas, like a good father, smiled at Nisus and had a shield brought to him, the work of Deidameon, a shield of the Danaans, had removed from the door of Neptune's temple, now a splendid prize for his noble youth. The races were done, the awards completed. Now, if there is a man here with any heart, come out with gloves on and hands held high. Aeneas spoke and put up a double prize for the boxing match. For the victor, a bullock with gilded horns and wooden fillets, a sword and fine helmet to console the vanquished. Without delay, Dares muscled himself up to a chorus of cheers. He was the only man who used to hold his own against Paris, and who at the funeral of Hector fought Butes, the great Bebrycian champion, and laid him out dying on the yellow sand. It was this Dares who now held his head high for the first match, flexed his arms for his fans, and began to shadow box, punching the air. Not a man stepped forward out of all that crowd to put on gloves and go up against him. Thinking everyone had conceded the prize, he went up to Aeneas, and without hesitation grasped the ox's horn with his left hand, saying, God is born, if no one dares to fight me, what are we standing here for? Give me the word to lead away my prize. The Dardanians all yelled that he should be given his prize, and then Acestes, sitting next to Entellus on the green grass, said to him sternly, Entellus, you were once the bravest of heroes, but it means nothing now if you are willing to let prizes like this be won uncontested. What about the divine Eryx, your teacher, honored in memory only? What about your fame throughout Sicily, all your trophies at home? And Entellus, it's not that my love of glory has given way to fear, but I'm old and slow, and I don't have any juice. I'm all worn out. If I had the youth that gives this rascal his confidence, if I had my youth back, I wouldn't need any prize. No prettied up bull to make me fight. I don't care about prizes. and he threw into the ring a pair of gloves of enormous weight, gloves that fierce Eryx would bind onto his hands for use in battle. They all stared in wonder at the outsized leather. 7-ply rawhide stiff with lead and iron. Dares stared the hardest and backed off fast, while Aeneas, Anchises' great-souled son, turned the huge, heavy gauntlets over and over. Then old Entellus' voice boomed out. What if you had seen the gloves of Hercules in the grim fight on this very shore? Your half-brother Eryx wielded these weapons. You can still see on them spattered blood and brains, and stood against great Hercules with them. I used them too, when my blood was hotter, before jealous old age sprinkled gray in my hair. But if Trojan Dares objects to these gloves, and if that sits well with pious Aeneas, and Acestes approves, we can even up the fight. Relax. I'll give up Eryx's gloves, and you take off your Trojan mitts. With that, he flung his mantle from his shoulders, bearing his heavy-boned, knotted arms, and stood like a giant in the middle of the sand. Father Aeneas, Anchises' true son, brought out 2 pairs of well-matched gloves, and bound the thongs to each boxer's hands. They were up on their toes in an instant, both fearless, hands lifted skyward. They held their heads high and well out of range, and began mixing it up, sparring for an opening, Dares relying on fancy footwork and youth, Entellus a heavyweight with a longer reach, but his knees were going and his breath came hard. They threw many knockout punches that missed, but landed many hard-body blows, thudding into the rib cage and chest, and made frequent jabs to head and ears. Their jaws snapped with the impact. Entellus stood his ground, tense and poised, swaying away from punches, eyes on his opponent. Dares fought as if attacking a city with high, massive walls, or laying siege to a hilltop fortress, trying first one approach, then another, using all of the arts of war and mounting various assaults in vain. Entellus showed a high right hand and stepped in for a hard downward blow. Dares saw it coming and twisted out of the way. Entellus spent all his force on the air and fell heavily onto the ground, like a vaulted pine uprooted and falling to the ground on Erymanthus or great Mount Ida. Trojans and Sicilians were on their feet, their shouts reaching the sky. Acestes ran out to lift his old friend from the ground, but the great hero was unfazed by the fall, and returned to the fight with even more spirit, pumped up by anger, fortified by shame, and fiercely proud. He drove Dares all over the arena, hitting him with a right, with a left, pelting him without letting up, like stinging hail, both fists flying. The hero pounded Dares until he sent him spinning. Father Aeneas did not allow Entellus to pursue his bitter rage any further. He stopped the fight, took Dares aside, and spoke to him these soothing words. What happened out there? Didn't you sense the powers had shifted? Yield to the gods. Then he announced that the boxing was over. Dares' supporters led him to the ships, dragging his weak knees and lolling his head as he spat out teeth clotted with blood. They took the sword and helmet, leaving first prize for Entellus, towering over the bull in pride of victory. The hero said, Goddess-born and Trojans all, observe the strength I had when I was young, and the kind of death you saved Dares from. He spoke, then stood facing the ox, that was his prize, and, lifting his right hand, poised the hardened glove high between its horns, struck and crushed its skull. The bull trembled and then sank to the ground, a lifeless heap. And Entellus spoke these heartfelt words. This life rather than Dares I offer to you, Eryx. I retire a champion and hang up my gloves. Aeneas now announced the archery contest, invited all comers, and listed the prizes. He set up a mast from Cerystus' ship, holding it in one great hand, and tied a dove to a cord suspended from its top. This was the target. The contestants gathered and threw their names into a bronze helmet. The crowd cheered when Hippocoon, son of Hyrtacus, was sorted first. Menestheus, who had just won the boat race, drew second. Menestheus, crowned with green olive leaves. Eurytion drew third. Your brother, most glorious Pandarus, who broke the truce as bidden, first to shoot into the Achaean ranks. The last position was drawn by Acestes, who had the courage to try his hand in a young man's game. Each man bent his bow and took arrows from his quiver. The first shot was taken by Hippocoon. His bowstring twanged, and his arrow whipped through the air, hitting the mast and sticking in the wood. The mast quivered, and the frightened dove fluttered her wings. The crowd applauded. Then Menestheus eagerly took his stance, drawing his bow back for a high shot. intent on his aim. But he had no luck at all. His iron-tipped arrow missed the bird, slicing instead through the heavy, knotted cord where it was attached to the tip of the mast. The freed dove flew off into the warm wind and up toward the clouds. Eurytion, who already had an arrow in his bow, spotted the carefree bird flapping her wings in the empty sky, and with a quick prayer to his brother Pandarus, shot her as she flew beneath a dark cloud. The dove fell lifeless, leaving her spirit in the stars, and in her fall she returned to its owner the piercing arrow. Only Acestes was left. He had no chance for a prize, but shot an arrow nonetheless, high into the air, the old patriarch displaying his skill and his sounding bow. Then a sudden marvel appeared, destined to be a mystic portent in days to come, when seers chanted of late-fulfilled omens, for as the arrow flew through the wispy clouds it caught fire and marked its trail with flames until it was consumed in the thin upper air. Like a star that has come unfixed from heaven and flies across the sky with long, streaming hair, Sicilians and Trojans stood rooted in wonder, murmuring prayers, and great Aeneas himself acknowledged the omen. He embraced Acestes and lavished gifts upon him, saying, "These are yours, sir. God on Olympus has shown with these auspices the high will that you should receive exceptional honors as tribute from long-lived Anchises himself. Accept this embossed bowl with Cisseus, the Thracian king, gave to my father as a memorial and pledge of his love." So saying, he wreathed Acestes' head with verdant laurel and proclaimed him foremost champion. The good Eurytion did not begrudge him this preference, even though he alone had shot down the dove. Second prize went for severing the cord, and third for piercing the mast with an arrow. Before the archery contest was over, Aeneas had a private word with Epetus, young Aeolus's trusted companion and guardian. "Go find Aeolus, and if the boys' column is ready for the equestrian parade, tell him to put on his best dress armor and lead the procession in his grandfather's honor." Aeneas himself had the crowd pull back and form a large circle round the open field. The boys entered on their bridled horses and shone in their parents' eyes. Teucrians and Thrinacians murmured in admiration. The boys were all crowned in trim-cut wreaths, and each bore 2 iron-tipped cornel spears. Some carried polished quivers, others wore twisted gold collars around their throats, all in ceremonial style. 3 troops of riders, each with a leader, rode in formation, each troop in 2 files of 6, each with a trainer, all gleaming in the light. The first troop of triumphant boys was led by a little Priam, Polites' noble son, named after his grandfather, and destined to increase the Italian race. His mount was a dappled Thracian stallion, white above the hooves and with a white forelock. The second troop was led by Aetus, founder of the Latin Aetae. Young Aetus was a dear friend of the boy Aeolus, and Aeolus, the handsomest of them all, led the last troop, riding a Sidonian horse given to him by the lovely Dido as a memorial and pledge of her love. The other boys were given Sicilian mounts by old Acestes. They received the crowd's applause nervously, and the Dardanians watching them recognized their ancestors' faces. After they had happily paraded around the entire assembly before their parents' eyes, the son of Epetus gave the signal, first a shout, then the crack of a whip, and the riders split into separate sections, each of the 3 troops dividing in half. At a second command, the 2 new formations wheeled round and advanced on each other, spears leveled. Then they performed other maneuvers, attacks and counterattacks, mirroring each other, weaving in and out of circular patterns, fighting mock battles in full battle gear, retreating, attacking, then calling a truce and riding along side by side. The labyrinth in lofty Crete is said to have been a route woven with blind walls, a maze with 1,000 irretraceable paths, designed to foil any map for escape. So too the patterns the sons of the Trojans wove in their mock attacks and retreats. Like dolphins crisscrossing the Carpathian Sea or the sea off Libya in their playful swimming. The tradition of this equestrian display and these mock battles was first revived by Ascanius, who taught the native Latins how to perform them when he built the walls of Alba Longa. The Albans taught their sons to do as Ascanius and the Trojans had done when they were boys. In the course of time, great Rome itself received and preserved this ancestral tradition. It is now called Troy, and the boys are called the Trojan troop. Thus, the funeral games of Anchises, venerable father of Aeneas. Fortune now shifted. While they celebrated the funeral games, Juno sent Iris down from the sky to the Trojan fleet and blew her along with a favoring wind. The goddess was scheming, her old grievance still unsatisfied. Iris, herself unseen, soared through 1,000 arcing colors, descending when she saw the great assembly. She passed along the shore and saw the fleet unattended in the empty harbor. Farther along, alone on the deserted beach, the women of Troy wept for Anchises, and wept as they looked out at the boundless sea. How weary they were, with so much water still to cross. All of them agreed it was a city they yearned for. The tedium of the sea had them sick at heart. Iris, who knew how to cause trouble, put aside her goddess's appearance and dress and became Beroe, the aged wife of Doricles of Tamaris, a woman nobly born, with a good name and fine sons. In this guise Iris mingled with the women of Troy and said, Trojan women, your tragedy is that Greek hands did not drag you off to be killed before the walls of your city. Oh, my unhappy people, for what destruction is fortune preserving you? 7 summers since the fall of Troy have we been driven on the wind, measuring every sea and land, every inhospitable rock and hostile star, rolling in the waves as we search the ocean for an ever-receding Italy. Now we are here in the land of Eryx, our brother, and Acestes is our host. Who is there? Who would prevent us from laying foundations, building walls, and giving our people a city? O my country, O gods of my country, snatched from enemy hands to no purpose, will there never again be a city called Troy? Will I never see the streams that Hector saw, the Xanthus and the Simois? Come with me, women, and set fire to these accursed ships. Burn them up. Cassandra, our prophetess, came to me in a dream and gave me torches, saying, Find Troy here. Here is your home. It is time to act. We cannot delay with portents like this. Look, Neptune's 4 altars. The god himself provides torches. So saying, she seized the deadly fire, and from where she stood whirled the torch high and let it fly. The women of Ilium were astounded, their minds tense and alert. The eldest among them, Pergo, nurse of so many of Priam's children, now spoke. This is not Beroe, women, nor Doricles' Trojan wife. I tell you, don't you see the marks of divinity? Her burning eyes, the high spirit, that face, the sound of her voice, her step when she walks. I just left Beroe, sick and fretting that she alone was missing our ceremony and not paying her last respects to Anchises. At first, the women were uncertain and gazed upon the ships with angry eyes, wavering between wretched love for the present land and kingdoms calling with the voice of fate. Then the goddess rose through the air on wings and cut a huge rainbow beneath the clouds. Now the women, frenzied by this portent, began to shriek and scream. They ransacked the camp's hearth fires and despoiled the altars and hurled torches made of twigs and branches. Vulcan raged unbridled through the pine benches, the banks of oars, and the painted sterns. The herald Eumelus brought the news to the assembly at Anchises' funeral mound that the ships were burning. Looking round, they saw black ash eddying up in a cloud, and first of them all, Ascanius, just as he was, gaily mounted for the games, rode furiously to the Trojan camp, the breathless trainers unable to restrain him. What madness is this? What are you doing? He asked. My pitiable countrywomen, this is not an enemy Argive encampment, but your future that is going up in smoke. Look, it is I, your Ascanius. And he threw at their feet the plumed helmet he had worn in the war games. Now Aeneas, at the head of columns of Teucrians, was riding up fast. The women scattered all over the shore, afraid, seeking the woods and the shelter of rocks. They were ashamed of their deed, ashamed to be seen. Then their mood altered. They recognized their menfolk, and Juno was shaken from their breasts. But the fire was not so easily tamed. Beneath the wet wood the caulking was still alive, slowly belching out smoke, and the smoldering heat ate at the keels and spread through the frames, resisting the men's heroic efforts and all the water they sluiced onto the ships. Then Aeneas rent his garments and, stretching out his palms, called on the gods. Almighty Jupiter, if you do not yet hate the Trojans to a man, if you have any feeling for human suffering, as you did of old, save the fleet from fire, now, Father, and snatch Troy's slim fortunes from utter perdition. Or finish what is left, and if I deserve it, strike me dead with lightning, here and now, and blot me out with your hand. He had scarcely spoken when a black tempest began to rage. Rain poured down without limit. Plains and steep hills trembled with thunder, and the whole sky fell in a turbulent deluge, swept with darkest winds. The ship's decks were inundated, the charred beams soaked, The fire's last trace is all extinguished, and all the ships but 4 saved from destruction. But Aeneas, stunned by this bitter blow, turned his immense troubles over and over in his great heart. Should he settle in Sicily and ignore fate, or seek Italy's shores? Then old Nautes came to him. Pallas Athena had instructed this man above all in her lore, teaching him what might be portended by the god's wrath and what fate demanded. He comforted Aeneas and said to him, Goddess-born, we must follow fate's lead. All fortune is overcome by endurance. You have Dardanian Acestes of divine stock. Take him into your counsel, a willing friend. Entrust to him as many as the lost ships carried, those who are weary of your great enterprise, the elderly, the mothers sick of the sea, and whoever is weak or afraid of danger. Choose them. Let the weary have their own city here, and call it Acestes, if that name is permitted. Old Nautes' friendly advice made Aeneas even more anxious. His mind was on fire. Night's black horses had reached the zenith when suddenly there glided down from heaven an apparition of his father, Anchises, who poured from his heart. My son, once dearer to me than life, while life remained, my son, steeled in Ilium's fall, I come here at Jove's command, Jove, who drove the fire away from the ships, finally taking pity on you from high heaven. You must follow the counsel most fair that old Nautes gives. Choose the bravest hearts and take them to Italy. There is a rough and sturdy race in Latium you must defeat in battle. But before that, come to the realms of Dis, the deeps of Avernus, to meet with me. For sinful Tartarus does not hold me, nor doleful shade. I live in Elysium, in the pleasant company of the souls of the blessed. Virgin Sibyl will lead you here for the price of the blood of many black cattle. Then you will learn all your race to come and the walls that will await you. And now farewell. Dewy night is turning past the middle of her course, and cruel dawn breathes upon me with her panting horses. He finished and was gone like a wisp of smoke. Where are you going? Why are you leaving so quickly? Why can't we hold each other? As Aeneas spoke, he was rekindling the hearth fire, and he paid reverence to the Lar of Pergamum and to Vesta with salted meal and clouds of incense. Moments later he met with his comrades, Acestes foremost, and explained to them his beloved father's instructions, and how he himself now stood. The discussion was brief, and Acestes had no objections. They registered the women and made citizens of those souls who had no need of glory. The ship's crews rebuilt the benches, replaced the timbers charred in the fire, and refit the oars and rudders. These men were few in number, but ready for battle. Meanwhile, Aeneas marked out with a plough the city's boundaries, and allotted homesteads, designating one neighborhood as Ilium, another as Troy. Trojan Acestes gladly called an assembly and handed down laws to the new city fathers. High on Mount Eryx, near to the stars, a temple was dedicated to Idalian Venus, and the sacred grove was annexed to the burial mound of Anchises. For 9 days all the people feasted and sacrificed at altars. The water was calm, and a steady south wind summoned the Trojans out to sea again. The sound of weeping curved along the shore. A day and a night the people prolonged their farewell embraces. Now the women themselves and the same men, to whom the very mention of the sea had been abhorrent, wanted to go and endure exile's toil. All of these good Aeneas consoled, and weeping himself, commended them to Acestes, their kin. Then he offered sacrifices, 3 calves to Eryx, and to the storms a lamb, and the ritual of untying the stern cable. He himself stood on the prow, his head wreathed in olive branches, holding a shallow bowl. He poured out wine and cast the entrails into the salt sea. They got under way and caught a rising tailwind. The crews outdid each other, sweeping the sea with oars. Venus, meanwhile, anxious and worried, was pouring out her heart to Neptune. Juno's iron anger and implacable heart forced me, Neptune, to exhaust every prayer. Neither time nor worship mollify her. Neither at Jove's command nor broken by fate does she acquiesce. It is not enough for her to have eaten out the heart of the Phrygian nation, not enough to have dragged Troy's remnant through every conceivable chastisement. She must persecute the city's very ashes and bones. The cause of such a monumental obsession she knows best herself. You yourself saw the wreckage she made of the sea off Libya, embroiling sea and sky, exploiting Aeolus, all in vain, and daring this in your realm. She drove the Trojan matrons to crime and shamefully burned the ships, forcing Aeneas to abandon his hope in a strange land. From now on, let them entrust their sails and safety to you and reach Laurentine Tiber, if what I request has been ordained by fate. And Saturn's son, lord of sea, replied, Cytherean, it is entirely proper that you trust my realm, whence, after all, you emerged at birth, and I have earned your trust. I have often quelled the fury of sea and sky, and no less on land. Simois and Xanthus can testify to this. Has your Aeneas been under my care? When Achilles stamped the Trojans into their city, robbing thousands of life, and all the streams were choked with corpses, and the river Xanthus could not roll its water into the sea, then, just as Aeneas was about to do battle with Peleus' strong son, equal in neither gods nor strength, I whisked him away in a hollow cloud, even though I yearned to tear down the perjured city walls which my own hands had built. Dispel your fears. My mind has not changed. Your son will arrive safely at Avernus, just as you wish. One man only will be lost at sea, one life given for many. So Neptune gladdened Venus's heart with soothing words. Then the Lord yoked his horses with gold, put bits into their foaming mouths, and let out the reins gliding lightly over the white caps in his chariot blue. The sea flattened its swollen waves under the thundering axle, and the clouds fled from the threatening sky. Then came the many shapes of his retinue, creatures from the deep, old Glaucus and his train, Eno's son Palæmon, swift Tritons, and all the company of Phorcus. On the left Thetis and Melite, and virgin Panopea, Nisaea, Spio, Cymodocea, and Thalia. Now a quiet joy came over Aeneas, and his tension ebbed away. He ordered the masts to be raised and the sails hung. The crews set the sheets and let out their sails, first to the left, then to the right, swinging the yardarms in unison as the fleet tacked into the wind. Palinurus kept the ships in tight formation. The other captains had orders to set their course by him. Dewy night had almost reached its midpoint, and the sailors were slumped over their oars, up and down the hard benches, when sleep drifted down from the stars of heaven, parting the shadows as she moved through the air, seeking you, Palinurus, bringing grim dreams to your innocent soul. The god settled on the high stern, the image of Phorbus, and said in a soft, insinuating voice, Palinurus, son of Iasius, the sea bears the fleet onward. Steady blows the wind. It is time for rest. Put your head down, and steal your weary eyes from their vigil. I'll fill in for you for a little while. And Palinurus hardly lifting his eyes. Are you asking me to forget what I know about a sea that looks calm? Asking me to entrust this monster? What, entrust Aeneas to the vagaries of wind and weather? I've been fooled too often by a calm, clear sky. Saying these things, he held the rudder tight, and did not move his eyes from the stars above. But the gods shook a branch soaked in leaf above both his temples. A branch drowsed with the power of Styx, and he nodded off, closed his swimming eyes. His limbs had just begun to relax when the god, looming over him, threw him head first into the water, along with part of the stern and the rudder he still held. He called his unhearing shipmates over and over as the god soared upward into thin air. The fleet sailed on safely without alarm, as Neptune had promised, and now approached the cliffs of the Sirens, formerly perilous and white with men's bones, but now just rocks, roaring and echoing in the ceaseless surf. When Aeneas sensed the ship was drifting without its master, he steered it himself through the midnight waves, sick at heart, lamenting the loss of his friend. O Palinurus, you trusted the sea's calm too much, and now your corpse will lie naked on an unknown shore.